Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 350 of the Prancing Pony podcast, where the stewardship became hereditary as a kingship.
Well, it's a good thing that's not the case here on PPP with your co-hosts, Alan.
Actually, maybe it should.
I mean, I'm not going to...
Are you going to be dying as one of the childless stewards there, Don?
Well, when you put it like that, I don't want the job anymore. Folks, pull up a bench in the common room and join us. I am Don Marshall, the obscure Lord of the Rings facts guy, and I am here with the man of the West who is thoroughly enjoying the days of the watchful peace, Alan Sisto.
That's right. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow the Uruks take Osgiliath. Folks, join us as we finish Appendix A1-4, this time looking at the nearly 1,000-year period of the stewards ruling in Gondor, and I promise the episode won't take 1,000 years.
And yet, we will still have even more letters and numbers after the appendices that I can't keep track of. No matter how you arrived here, you are all welcome here in the common room at the Prancing Pony podcast. We are reading and talking our way through Middle-earth with plenty of speculation, Roman numerals, and bad jokes along the way.
I like that. We do love our deep dives into the lore, though, discussing our favorite themes and, of course, a whole lot more.
But we do like to keep it light and fun, unlike Roman numerals, and that's my final joke about that for the evening, just like a couple of friends chatting at a pub, and we're very glad you've joined us.
We are indeed, and I'm sure you'll be glad you joined as well. But before we get to tonight's chapter discussion, it's time to take a look at some more kingly gifts. And today we're taking a look at a set I have been waiting to get my hands on since they announced it. It's the 70th anniversary deluxe edition of The Lord of the Rings.
Now, Alan.
Uh-huh.
When you handed me this script, I did need to read ahead on this a little bit, and
you don't have
I do have to ask. This is now your what copy of The Lord of the Rings?
18th.
18th.
Yeah.
18th copy of The Lord of the Rings.
Rookie numbers.
Okay. Would you mind selling me on why you need this now 18th copy, please?
Yeah. Well, honestly, it's the best blend of deluxe quality. There's always been deluxe editions, but this is really the best blend of like a deluxe edition and readability. And I want to go ahead and dive into some of the reasons why I think this is the singular set that I would recommend if someone were to only have one singular hardcover box set. First, a reminder why a box set of 3 volumes, at least in my opinion, is a better purchase. Straight up, one reason only, readability. The single volume editions, like the beautiful author illustrated version that came out in both standard and deluxe editions a couple years back. I like them, but they're heavy, they're thick. Well, unless you have the 1969 deluxe India paper edition, but I digress. These single volume editions, I know you're like, what? I'll show you.
You're such a nerd sometimes.
I am a nerd. I'm a book collecting Tolkien nerd. These thick volumes, they just don't open and lay flat very well. They certainly don't travel well. I mean, not that you'd want to travel with this set either, but the whole point is, why is a 3-volume set better than a single volume set? And really, it's just that portability and readability. I mean, frankly, if the only inconvenience to a 3-volume set is that you have to pull one off your shelf when you get to the end of Fellowship or Two Towers, that's not much. And it's more than made up for by having a book that you can carry with you, even if it's, I don't know, just across the room to a reading nook or your bedside table.
Now, I've always been curious about the 3-volume versus 1-volume scenario because it occurs to me that there's an alternate universe that exists where it is just one enormous book published for thousands of pages.
That's true. I mean, and that's actually what it is when you look at the 3-volume sets. The pagination continues from volume to volume so that the page numbers track with the single volume edition. And it is true that Tolkien wanted it published as one book. But unless you have that 1969 India paper edition, it really just becomes a little unwieldy. So there was a 3-volume set that came out a few years ago. I think it was in 2020. And it's also Alan Lee illustrated, and it's great. I really enjoy it. It's just a traditional set, not a deluxe edition set. But this set really combines like the best of deluxe details with still quite readable. So let's talk some details. First, HarperCollins has finally solved, for the most part, a problem that we really haven't thought of very often. It's the challenge that we get with Amazon's horrible shipping on books like this. The publisher box, that is to say the box that Amazon gets from HarperCollins, is now designed in such a way as to protect the set inside, regardless of what the shipper then puts the box into. You can actually look for the Tolkien Collector's Guide unboxing video for this set to see what I mean. I'll try to get a link to that in the show notes. Then there's the sturdy slipcase that these volumes rest in. It's cloth covered. It's got Alan Lee's sort of silver images, these gilt images of Barad-dûr on one side, Minas Tirith on the other. and a gorgeous internal illustration. It's called Here at the End of All Things. It's Frodo at the key moment in the Samath Naur and Mount Doom, and it lines the inside of the box. So when you take the volumes out, you can see the piece. And like the recent poetry set, and unlike the History of Middle-earth sets, there is enough space in the boxes to allow you to easily remove the volumes. But the box is really, really sturdy. It feels like it's going to stand up to use, which is something I can't say for the Folio Society's incredibly expensive recent edition.
Yeah, and speaking truly from the heart here, I've Googled it as Alan was describing these books. They are really beautiful. Quarter bound with a very matte blue leather with gray cloth. There's a silver gilt on the spine for the little Tolkien monogram and the title as well, and a silver gilt trim around the inset mounted art piece on each volume. It is stunning to look at.
It really is. And those covers are gorgeous. I really like it. Instead of slapping a print on the front cover where it could just get pulled off every time you're sliding it in and out of the box, the prints are actually mounted in a slight inset in the cover itself. So there's like a little indent. And each of the cover prints, which are, fairly small on the cover, are then provided as a loose art print on thick quality cardstock in each volume so that you get a bigger version of them. Now, the books themselves, though, are what matter, right? And these are honestly some of the best that I've looked at, really right up there. They're properly sewn bindings instead of those cheap glue bindings. They are both top and bottom stained, which we don't often see. Usually you'll get a top stain, but you won't have a bottom stain. And I really love this. It's got a 4-edge illustration. And the 4-edge illustration is spread across all 3 volumes. So when you take the 3 volumes out and you have them stacked up, you can actually see Alan Lee's The Ring, which is the ring at the bottom of the Anduin that he's drawn before, as a 4-edge painting. It's absolutely stunning.
It is truly remarkable, and the fact that it spans through all 3 books is awesome. Also want to point out the printing is red and black, so we get the ring text in red.
Yes.
Dual color footnotes, so the text is black, but the numbering is red. And there's cool details, like the actual years in the Tale of Years are printed in red, and the events of those years are black. So the printer is Graphicom in Italy, and they are the same ones who handled the deluxe Folio Society edition just a couple of years back.
Yeah, and did a fantastic job on it. I might have my gripe in terms of the value of that set. Like, was it really worth how much I spent on it? But the printing is not one of my complaints. And that's what I have to say about this 3-volume set. In many ways, it's almost like a miniature and much more affordable Folio Society set. It's the same sort of binding, the quarter-bound leather, cover art with a gilt trim, interior illustration in the box, and more. Plus, it has all of the art pieces that were included in the Folio Society edition, plus a handful of new ones and some updated ones as well.
There's around 20 plates in each volume. The paper for the art is whiter and glossier than the slightly creamier pages of text, and the color reproduction has been handled really well. Each volume also includes a full-page frontispiece, and there are 2 loose maps, one of Middle-earth in the Fellowship volume, and one of Gondor, Rohan, and Mordor in the Return of the King volume.
And I like that. I like loose maps rather than the fold-out ones where you're afraid you're going to tear it out of the book. I really enjoy that. Now, here's the thing. We know that there's going to be a Folio Society limited edition of The Hobbit. I actually have put my name on the email list. So the moment it gets released, I'll get that notification and I can order it if I want. And it's designed to match the existing Folio Lord of the Rings. I expect then that we're going to see a similar volume to this, again, printed by Graphicom and being sort of a folio set in miniature, albeit not numbered, sometime after that. And that's the thing, that the reason those folio sets are so expensive, there were only 1,000 of them, and they're also huge. They're something like 14 or 15 inches tall. I mean, they're coffee table
Oh
books.
my goodness.
Yeah. They're deadly weapons. They're huge. Talk about not traveling well, right? I mean,
no kidding.
It's bigger than your carry-on item. They're absolutely fantastic, and it is nice to see Alan Lee's artwork even bigger. But these are solid, and the size is really right. And because it's right up there in terms of artwork, print quality, build quality, and what's included, I have to say this set vaults to the top of the charts in terms of a mass-produced 3-volume set. It's the best, not counting limited editions, 3-volume set.
That is quite high praise, considering you have 18 editions of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
I gotta know. When was what's the most valuable one? What's the most expensive? Tell me everything.
Okay. Well, the most expensive one, it would be the 2022 Folio Society Deluxe set. I've got box number or set number 402 out of 1,000. These are all, gorgeous, gorgeous volumes. I also have 3 other hardcover 3-volume editions. I have an inexpensive HarperCollins set. You all might have seen this. They're green, red, and blue. They're fairly recent. They're not printed on the best paper, but they're readable. They're good. Then I have that 2020 Alan Lee illustrated set, and then this new 2024 70th Anniversary Deluxe set. Those are the only 3-volume editions that I have in hardcover. I do have 5 paperback 3-volume editions.
Oh my God.
I have the Mariner set, which is what I use for preparing the show. It's super inexpensive. It's just easy to use. I do have a Methuen set. That's the Canadian print version. So I don't know, does it include anything like poutine or hockey references? Does it say sorry when it apologizes? I don't know. I just made Canadian jokes, and I'm going to get in so much trouble for that.
Oh yeah, Mr. Frodo and I were just going to go hop up there to Carathras and grab some...
Eh?
Well, I hadn't finished my sentence. You kept
in my beloved Canadians.
You just alienated an entire country, eh?
Yeah. So that's the Methuen set. I also have the Ballantine Silver Jubilee set. I love that one. It's got the gold foil box. It's got the Hobbit and the 3 volumes of the Lord of the Rings with the sweet artwork. You remember those covers?
Yeah.
Fantastic. I have the Cirion set, which I have it literally for the cover art alone.
I was about to say, is it the cover art?
That is gorgeous, gorgeous artwork. And then I actually have the Notorious Ace paperback set as well.
Notorious?
Yeah, that's a whole nother topic. That's the one that was published because somebody here in the U.S. made the argument that Lord of the Rings had fallen into the public domain in the U.S. because of the copyright problems. So the American published version was using essentially the pages from the British publisher, and U.S. copyright law at the time meant that arguably that protection didn't apply to the U.S. published edition of The Lord of the Rings, first edition. So this company Ace goes and makes these cheap paperbacks, really, typical paperback dime store quality books with awful artwork. I mean, just laughable artwork. And that's what Tolkien's responding to. If you see I think it's his foreword to the second edition, he's like, please, for the love of all that is holy, don't buy these books, right? So, of course I did, because I have so many other sets, I feel like I can. And then I have 6 hardcover single volume editions. I have the 1969 Deluxe India paper edition. I have a 1992 Centenary edition, which is this book, but in a single volume rather than 3 and with a few older pieces of art. But that one is particularly important to me. It's the one I took with me to a book signing in Santa Monica way back in 2001, attended by a guy by the name of Peter Jackson and a couple of people he worked with, Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Sean Astin. So that volume is actually signed by the 4 of them. And then
how much?
I have no idea how much it would be worth now. I don't know. Probably $1.50 to some of the people in our audience who don't like the movies.
Hey, Alan, for no particular reason, could you just cut this part of the podcast and then tell me your full address and when you would not be home?
When I would not be home. That's right. Yeah.
No particular reason. Anyway, carry on.
Absolutely. And then there's the 2004 50th Anniversary Deluxe Edition. That's in the big set of all those deluxe editions. The 2014 Alan Lee Illustrated, the 2021 Tolkien Illustrated Edition, both in standard and deluxe. And then, of course, the other 3 are an ebook and 2 audiobook editions, if you want to count those. That would make 18.
I count those.
Yeah.
You spent money on 18.
Yeah, that's fair.
Hey,
that's
you
fair.
know what? To each their own. I respect it. That is some dedication.
This is the best 3-volume set, no doubt. I mean, in terms of just overall value for money and quality for money, 100%.
This has been Alan's Hyperfixation. I will kick us off for the chapter discussion.
Yes, you will. Don, please let us go ahead and begin reading Appendix A1 for the Stewards.
18 copies.
I probably have a dozen each of the Silmarillion and the Hobbit, too.
Oh, my God. I didn't even get to the other books.
At least with those, I don't have to worry about single volume versus 3 volume, right?
Whatever helps you sleep at night, Alan.
Good insurance policy.
For sure. All right. Here we go. The house of the stewards is called the House of Hurin, for they were descendants of the steward of King Menaredil, Hurin of Emin Arnen, a man of high Númenorian race. After his day, the kings had always chosen their stewards from among his descendants, and after the days of Pelendor, the stewardship became hereditary as a kingship, from father to son or nearest kin. Each new steward, indeed, took office with the oath to hold rod and rule in the name of the king until he shall return. But these soon became words of a ritual little heeded, for the stewards exercised all the power of the kings. Yet many in Gondor still believed that a king would indeed return in some time to come. And some remembered the ancient line of the north, which it was rumored still lived on in the shadows. But against such thoughts, the ruling stewards hardened their hearts. Nonetheless, the stewards never sat on the ancient throne, and they wore no crown, and held no scepter. They bore a white rod only as a token of their office, and their banner was white without charge. But the royal banner had been sable, upon which was displayed a white tree in blossom beneath 7 stars. After Mardil Varonwe, who was reckoned the first of the line, there followed 24 ruling stewards of Gondor, until the time of Denethor II, the 26th and last. At first, they had quiet, for those were the days of the watchful peace, during which Sauron withdrew before the power of the White Council and the Ringwraiths remained hidden in Morgul Vale. But from the time of Denethor I, there was never full peace again, and even when Gondor had no great or open war, its borders were under constant threat. In the last years of Denethor I, the race of Uruks, black orcs of great strength, first appeared out of Mordor, and in the year 2475, they swept across Ecthelion and took Osgiliath. Boromir, son of Denethor, after whom Boromir of the Nine Walkers was later named, defeated them and regained Ecthelion. But Osgiliath was finally ruined, and its great stone bridge was broken. No people dwelt there afterwards.
Thank you, Don. That was a fantastic reading. Yeah.
Thank you.
So right off the bat, we find out that the House of the Stewards were all from the same noble house, the House of Hurin. No, not that Hurin, but Hurin of Emin Arnin, who was not only the steward to King Menardil, but a kinsman to the king.
That's right. In The Nature of Middle-earth, in the short chapter entitled Beards, where we learn that all
I love that. Just beards.
It's all we need.
What's your favorite chapter? Beards. Yeah, enough said right there.
So it's in this short chapter entitled Beards where we learn that all Númenorians of royal descent were beardless.
That's
Peter
right.
Jackson.
Clearly, you and I are not royal. And yes, Peter Jackson needs to take note, huh?
Well, Tolkien explains something about Gandalf's comment when he said that by some chance the blood of Númenor runs true in Denethor.
That's exactly right. And that is where we learn this, that by some event in Denethor's ancestry, which Gandalf had not investigated, he had this mark of ultimately royal descent, and that is the beardlessness. This chance, I said, Tolkien writes, was to be seen in the fact that Hurin the first steward, from whom Denethor was directly descended, must have been a kinsman of King Menardil of ultimately royal descent, though not near enough in kinship for him or his descendants to claim the throne.
Now, remember, when the stewardship started, it wasn't hereditary, but it didn't start with Hurin of Emin Arnin. That's just when the house of the stewards began.
That's right. And we learn in Unfinished Tales, in a footnote to the story of Cirion and Eorl, that it was Romendikil I who established the office of steward, Arandur, king's servant. But he was chosen by the king as a man of high trust and wisdom, usually advanced in years, since he was not permitted to go to war or to leave the realm. He was never a member of the royal house.
So they are the royal descendants, but never a member of the royal house.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense, as the kings, especially after the Kinstrife, they really wouldn't want someone eligible for the throne to be that close to power.
Very good point. Now, we do get a touch more on this in The Peoples of Middle-earth, Part 1, Chapter 7, The Heirs of Elendil, where Tolkien writes that even though the House of Hurin were not in the direct line of descent from Elendil, they were ultimately of royal origin, and had in any case kept their blood more pure than most other families in the later ages. However, that only starts, that is to say the House of Hurin, with Hurin, steward to King Menardil, and not with the beginning of the office itself under Romendikil. That's quite a gap. Romendikil I was the 8th king back in Third Age 492 to 541. Menardil was the 25th king, ruling from 1621 to 1634.
So, gentle listeners, you may be asking yourself, what did the office of stewards look like for 1,100 years?
Yeah.
Well, for that, we need to go back to beards. This is, of course, the
beards.
chapter in the nature of Middle-earth and not the actual facial hair. But here we read in the chapter, the kings of Gondor had no doubt had stewards from an early time, but these were only minor officials charged with supervision of the king's halls, houses, and lands.
That makes sense. That changed, though, with Menardil's appointment of Hurin of Eminarnen. As Tolkien writes, that appointment, quote, was different. He was evidently the chief officer under the crown, prime counselor of the king, and, at appointment, endowed with the right to assume vice-regal status and assist in determining the choice of heir to the throne if this became vacant in his time. Wow, that is a much more powerful and influential role than just the guy who keeps the books.
And after that, we read that kings chose their stewards from among his descendants until after Pelendor, that's the steward of King Ondahar, so more than 300 years later, when the role of stewards became hereditary, like the kingship.
Now, that's the thing. It's kind of funny. I'm thinking, okay, so they chose from the descendants, but then it became hereditary. It already sounds like it's hereditary. I mean, that's a little bit confusing to me, but Tolkien explains that in The Heirs of Elendil, back in the Peoples of Middle-earth, and we get more. From that time, talking about the time of Hurin, from the time of Hurin on, the kings usually chose their steward from this family, though a son did not necessarily succeed a father. But in fact, it had descended from father to son since Pelendor, steward to King Ondahar, and after the ending of the kings, it became hereditary. Though if a steward left no son, the office might pass in the female line, that is, to his sister's son or to his father's sister's son. The choice was made according to their worth among the near kin by the Council of Gondor, but the council had no power of choice if there was a son living.
So yeah, hereditary as a kingship.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what did that hereditary stewardship look like? Well, we saw earlier a very specific power of Hurin and his descendants, vice-regal status, that is prime counselor, and even invested with the authority to determine the choice of heir to the throne, big deal, if needed. That's huge.
Right. It is huge. Now, sure, they did take an oath that said they ruled in the name of the king until he shall return. But those were just words eventually, and the text here says that they exercised all the power of the kings.
So much so that the text says that they hardened their hearts against the idea of the ancient line in the north.
That's such a line. That is such a line, isn't it, Don? They hardened their hearts. It's classic Tolkien dipping into like scriptural sounding language. You know, this is like the pharaohs hardening their hearts against what the plagues and what Moses was doing. And, you know, hardened their hearts has a ring to it.
Does.
For a lot of his readers, it would immediately make that reference. Yeah.
I do regret to inform you, we do have to go back to beards again. There is a part in there where Tolkien is explaining that the stewards had official Quenya names after the appointment of Hurin. He writes, they had Quenya names which had long been a privilege only of those of proved royal descent. So,
that's right. Yeah. Now, of course, Hurin, interestingly enough, isn't a Quenya name, of course, and most of the names that you think of when you're thinking about the stewards, they're not Quenya either. Pelendor, Vorondil, and Mardil are all Quenya, but then they go back to Sindarin names after that.
And this is why we're bringing this in here at this point about the stewards exercising all the power of the kings, because Tolkien explains that the shift back to Sindarin names was probably simply a part of the ritual humility of the ruling stewards. Like they're never sitting on the throne, having no crown or scepter, and banner without device, and holding office only in name of the king until he shall return.
Here's the twist, though. They didn't want that to happen. Tolkien adds, I say ritual, because it was impossible that any king should return unless he were a descendant of Elendil from Isildur, not an Aryan. But from Pelendor onwards, and I love this, Tolkien's very clear about this, the ruling stewards were determined not to receive any such claimant, but to remain supreme rulers of Gondor. And that explains Denethor a bit better, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly gives him some context, you know. Yeah. Definitely proud, definitely.
All of his ancestors ruled the same way.
Mm-hmm.
They would have all rejected Aragorn too. Even, interestingly enough, his father, who, as we'll see, worked very closely with the king.
Little did he know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But before we move on, Ellen, we do get a little bit about how they only use the white rod as a token of their office, but we also get a glimpse of the standard of Elendil, and this is contrasted with the banner of the stewards. This is the plain white flag, you'll remember. Right. But it is nice to see that description, the black with the white tree in blossom and 7 stars above it.
I love that. And really, that just gives me an excuse to read this next passage. It takes me back to the Pelennor fields and the arrival of Aragorn. Éomer is there ready to die on that little green hillock where he'd set his banner, laughing at despair as he looked at the arrival of the black ships. And then, sometimes you just have to read great stuff. And then wonder took him, and a great joy. And he cast his sword up in the sunlight and sang as he caught it. And all eyes followed his gaze. And behold, upon the foremost ship, a great standard broke, and the wind displayed it as she turned towards the Harland. There flowered a white tree, and that was for Gondor. But 7 stars were about it, and a high crown above it, the signs of Elendil that no lord had borne for years beyond count. And the stars flamed in the sunlight, for they were wrought of gems by Arwen, daughter of Elrond. And the crown was bright in the morning, for it was wrought of mithril and gold. Thus came Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Elessar, Isildur's heir, out of the paths of the dead, borne upon a wind from the sea to the kingdom of Gondor. I still get chills reading that every time.
Every time.
The eucatastrophe. Yes. Yes.
Beautiful piece. Love that. So clearly don't have to worry about the beards there. A quick overview in that next area from the line of ruling stewards from Mardil, Varonwe to Denethor II. That is a total of 26. Mm-hmm. But before we start our look at some individual times, we're going to start with Denethor I. We want to mention Mardil Varonwe's father, the son of Pelennor. And that is because of something that he made during his time as steward that we see in The Lord of the Rings.
That's right. So Varondil is remembered as the hunter. And Denethor II, that's of course the Denethor we're all familiar with from The Lord of the Rings, tells Pippin a bit about him after the hobbit noticed the shards of Boromir's horn on his lap. "That is the horn that Boromir always wore," cried Pippin. "Verily," said Denethor, "and in my turn I bore it, and so did each eldest son of our house, far back into the vanished years before the failing of the kings, since Varondil, father of Mardil, hunted the wild kine of Arra in the far fields of Rhûn." That's just so cool. Had to bring that in. Just, again, because the stewards and the kings and all this history, it's all tied together, and it's just, yeah.
It does kind of sound like an obscure Lord of the Rings fact, Alan.
It does, doesn't it?
It does. We move on from one obscure fact to another because we move on to the format of the rest of the chapter, which is snippets of history in Gondor under some of the ruling stewards. We begin with Denethor I. He was the 10th ruling steward. This is from the Third Age year, 2435 to 2477. Mm-hmm. And towards the end of his term, we read about the race of Uruks, black orcs of great strength, and the threat that they presented to Gondor.
That's right. Now, they were able to take Osgiliath and Ecthelion. And while this Denethor's son, Boromir, both had namesakes in the Denethor and Boromir that you're familiar with.
We've had one, yes.
That's right. We've had one Denethor. What about second Denethor? I don't know that I want a second Denethor, really. The first one seems all right. I'm not so sure about the second.
Yeah.
So while this Boromir was able to retake Ecthelion, Osgiliath itself, the city was finally destroyed. And that was a long, slow descent for the former capital of Gondor. I mean, the kin strife caused the beginning of the city's decline in Third Age 1437 after it was sacked and burned by Castamir. A couple of hundred years later, the Great Plague in 1636 killed a large number of people that had still been remaining. And by 1640, the king's house had been moved to Minas Anor. Finally, Minas Ithil was taken, becoming Minas Morgul in 2002. And then finally, in 2475, Osgiliath was overrun. It took 1,000 years from the kin strife to total abandonment.
Wow, Tolkien really hates Osgiliath, doesn't he?
He does seem to have it in for Osgiliath, doesn't it?
He really does.
It's
because
bad.
in that small part, though, that I do want to mention that we didn't read, we do get a very brief bit on this Boromir. Uh-huh. He was apparently so great that the Witch King was afraid of him.
Wow.
Something to throw out.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Was that secretly Gandalf? I don't know if the timelines line up.
Well, no, as we'll find out. Yeah,
that's fair. We'll look at the description. Physically strong, both in terms of his own physicality and also in terms of his mind and his will.
Yeah.
But a Morgul wound will, as Frodo knows, take its toll. He had been hurt in the retaking of Ecthelion and died after only a 12-year rule as steward, which is a bummer.
And that is short for most of the stewards. That's fair.
You know what is short as well?
Mm-hmm.
This ad break that we're about to take.
Soon we'll get back to Cirion and his long rule, but before we do, we want to remind you that there's a lot more talk going on at the Prancing Pony podcast than just us.
That's right. The PPP has an amazing listener community, and they are always coming up with great questions and discussions across all of our social media spaces. Check out our common room on Facebook, our dedicated subreddit, Twitter, and more.
On Facebook, just look for the Prancing Pony podcast. Follow the page to get the news, but you're going to want to join the group to get involved in some great discussions.
Or if you prefer Reddit, you can find us there at r/PrancingPonyPod. On Twitter and Instagram, we are simply Prancing Pony Pod.
And if you want daily Tolkien content, check out Today's Tolkien Times on YouTube and all your favorite podcast apps. It's my new short format daily show with everything from Middle-earth Map Mondays to Second Age Saturdays. Be sure to check it out at youtube.com/@TolkienTimes and follow @TolkienTimes on all your social media.
All right, ad break over. Alan, are you ready to bring us to the next portion of the reading?
We're going to read about Cirion. After him began the long rule of Cirion. He was watchful and wary, but the reach of Gondor had grown short, and he could do little more than defend his borders, while his enemies, or the power that moved them, prepared strokes against him that he could not hinder. The corsairs harried his coasts, but it was in the north that his chief peril lay. In the wide lands of Rhovanion, between Mirkwood and the river Running, a fierce people now dwelt, wholly under the shadow of Dol Guldur. Often they made raids through the forest until the Vale of Anduin, south of the Gladden, was largely deserted. These Balchoth were constantly increased by others of like kind that came in from the east, whereas the people of Calenarthon had dwindled. Cirion was hard put to it to hold the line of the Anduin. Foreseeing the storm, Cirion sent north for aid, but overlate. For in that year, 2510, the Balchoth, having built many great boats and rafts on the east shores of Anduin, swarmed over the river and swept away the defenders. An army marching up from the south was cut off and driven north over the Limelight, and there it was suddenly attacked by a horde of orcs from the mountains and pressed towards the Anduin. Then, out of the north, there came help beyond hope, and the horns of the Rohirrim were first heard in Gondor. Eorl the Young came with his riders and swept away the enemy and pursued the Balchoth to the death over the fields of Calenarthon. Cirion granted to Eorl that land to dwell in, and he swore to Cirion the oath of Eorl, of friendship at need or at call to the lords of Gondor. Oh,
that's good. That's some good quality Tolkien right there. That is some eucatastrophe if I've ever heard some.
Oh, the horns of the Rohirrim were first heard in Gondor. I love that.
Love it so much.
Help beyond hope. What a line. What a line.
I do believe help beyond hope rings very similar to help unlooked for, which is what Aragorn describes Gandalf's return as.
That's right. Yeah.
Love it. So we move on to this next steward, Cirion. He's the son of the steward Boromir. No, not that one. He actually never became steward.
I was going to say, he was in line to become the steward, but
too soon. Sorry, buddy. Mm-hmm. So he was the son of the steward Boromir that we talked about in the last section, and became steward at age 40 when his father died of that Morgul wound I mentioned before. By this time, Gondor was smaller and less powerful. They had just lost Osgiliath. And though Boromir had won back Ecthelion, the kingdom didn't stretch up all the way north and east as it once had.
That's right. Even the Corsairs were giving him trouble along the coast. You remember our talks about the Gondorian Civil War, the Kinstrife. These aren't just random pirates. These are a combination of Gondorian traders and Black Númenorians that hate Gondor.
Yeah, but the much bigger danger is in the north, where a new and fierce people are living. The text says that they made their homes in the area to the east of Mirkwood, between the forest and the Celduin.
Now, that's a huge area when you look at the map. The river running, that's the Kelduin, flows from its source near the Lonely Mountain, and it does go south along the eastern edge of Mirkwood until about halfway down the forest, and then it curves to the southeast, eventually finding its way to the Sea of Rune and leaving a big, big empty space on the map that is almost as large, if not as large, as Gondor itself.
Well, if the city's not big enough for both of us, go build a city there. But
there you
no,
go.
They want this city.
Might as well.
How they were wholly under the shadow of Dol Guldur. And
That's
keep
right.
that in mind, because at this point, which is Third Age, the year 2489, it is Sauron, the necromancer, dwelling over there in Dol Guldur.
That's right. This is not late Third Age when Sauron is in Barad-dûr and it's Khamûl the Easterling who's in Dol Guldur. It'll be nearly 500 years until 2941 when the White Council attacks Dol Guldur and Sauron flees.
And it is under that influence, note that line earlier about his enemies or the powers that moved them.
I love that. The power that moved them. It goes back to that line we talked about this a couple weeks ago, I think, where on their own, these enemies were not going to have the will or the strength to fight Gondor. But Sauron was making it all happen behind the scenes. His machinations were causing all this conflict. Yeah.
Yeah. And keep in mind, Alan, this is hearkening back to Sauron's influence on the Easterlings and the alliance that they made with Harad and Khand.
Mm-hmm.
They're raiding through the forests, basically driving away the men.
That's right. And that's where we get a word that's relatively new, even if it sounds familiar. After all, I talked about that Hoth ending back when we were introduced to the name of the people living around the Bay of Thorongil, the Lossoth.
From an entry in The Tale of Years and some detail in the House of Aoral portion of Appendix A, we know that Balcoth are Easterlings, almost certainly kin to the Wain Riders, who brought the third evil upon Gondor in the year 1944. That is some 500 years before this time.
Yeah, they are holding a grudge. But let's talk about that word briefly, Balcoth. It's Sindarin for horrible horde, with Balch meaning fierce or ferocious. Hoth is host or horde. We talked about that with the Lossoth, right? That Hoth element is always used in a negative context. We don't see the Balch element elsewhere, but that Hoth shows up with Glamhoth and Lossoth, Din Horde and Snowmen.
Yeah, and these Balhoth, they keep swelling in number, while at the same time Gondor is essentially shrinking, making it very hard for Cirion to maintain enough armed forces to basically keep the Anduin as a border. Keep in mind, that used to extend way further to the east.
Much further. I mean, remember, we had kings that were fighting victorious battles on the other side of the Sea of Rune. It was a much, much bigger kingdom at the time. Now, Cirion knew he was in a bind, and so he asked the Eotheod for help. Now, here's the thing. Matt and I are going to spend 6 to 8 episodes, I haven't finalized the number yet, sometime in January and February, on the story of Cirion and Eorl from Unfinished Tales. So I am not going to go in depth on it here. I apologize for that.
However, because I'm here, that does not mean we're going to skip through the whole thing.
Oh, of course not.
Let's maybe pull some text that's maybe directly connected to the highlights mentioned here.
That's fair. So first up, Cirion sends for aid in 2510. So let's go ahead and look at that. In this peril, Cirion's thought turned at last in desperation to the Eotheod, and he determined to send messengers to them. But they would have to go through Calanarthon and over the Undeeps, and then through lands already watched and patrolled by the Balchath, before they could reach the Vales of Anduin. This would mean a ride of some 450 miles to the Undeeps, and more than 500 thence to the Eotheod, and from the Undeeps they would be forced to go warily, and mostly by night until they had passed the shadow of Dol Guldur. Cirion had little hope that any of them would get through. He called for volunteers, and choosing 6 riders of great courage and endurance, he sent them out in pairs with a day's interval between them. It's wild that we just mentioned this last week in a totally unrelated philology fair. We were talking about Arvedwi's name, meaning last king, and the Lenated Vedwi, meaning last, coming from the root met that we saw in Ambarmetta, ending of the world, and coming full circle to this reading, Rochan Methestel, rider of the last hope, which is the name given to the one of those 6 that made it through.
This has been Philology Wednesday Part 2, I assume?
I suppose. I mean, it's just wild that passage, because of the Met root, And yet here we are talking about the same guy. Yeah.
This just goes to show you that Tolkien was working on an entirely another level of literary genius. And I guess as we carry on from the text, one of them must have made it.
Yeah, that would be the writer of The Last Hope who made it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. After the Balcoth swarm over the Anduin in huge numbers and attack Cirion's army, which is then also attacked by orcs. Gee, Sauron, are you coordinating all these armies?
Yeah,
What's happening here? Yeah, he is.
Pretty
Nudge,
much.
nudge, wink, wink. We read that out of the north there came help beyond hope, and the horns of the Rohirrim were first heard in Gondor.
And oh man, I know. Like we said when we read that, I still get chills just thinking about that. More than 500 years before Theoden and the riders of Rohan come to the rescue of Minas Tirith at the Battle of the Pelennor, Eorl the Young leads his people down to rescue Gondor.
Very strange how history continues to repeat itself in Tolkien's world, but believe it or not, there's not a big descriptor of this battle in the Unfinished Tales version.
No.
In fact, it's not much more than what we read here. We'll take a look. All hope was lost when, unlooked for, the riders came out of the north and broke upon the rear of the enemy. Then the fortunes of battle were reversed, and the enemy was driven with slaughter over Limelight. Eorl led his men in pursuit, and so great was the fear that went before the horsemen of the north that the invaders of the wold were also thrown into panic, and the riders hunted them over the plains of Calenarthon. That is when we read that Cirion gave Calenarthon to Eorl and his people, and then they swore that very special oath.
Now that, though, I am going to skip and wait for our episodes on this to talk about. Otherwise, we'd be here all night. Okay, fine. Twist my arm. I will read the bit about the oath that Cirion spoke in Quenya. You knew that had to be coming, right?
Always.
All right. Just this part, though. For as he stood up, being Cirion, as he stood up, the sun went down in flame in the west, and his white robes seemed to be on fire. And after he had vowed that Gondor should be bound by a like bond of friendship and aid in all need, he lifted up his voice and said in Quenya, Vanda sina termaruva elena norio alcar en yalia narelindil vrondo vronwe. Nai tiruvantes e harar mahalmassen min numen ari eru I or ilie mahalmar ea tenoyo.
You're just showing off, and my God, it's impressive. Good Lord, Alan.
I love reading Quenya aloud. It's such a beautiful language, isn't it?
That is stunning, and just that's not a real language. Tolkien
that's
just
what's
made
so
that up.
Amazing. I know. It's just gorgeous, isn't it? Yeah.
All right. Should I translate it for the
Yes,
people that
please
maybe
do.
don't speak Quenya at home?
Which I hope is most people.
Well, on this podcast, who even knows?
I know, that's the thing. There will be some.
Yeah, it roughly translates to, this oath shall stand in memory of the glory of the land of the star, and of the faith of Elendil the faithful, in the keeping of those who sit upon the thrones of the west, and of the one who is above all thrones forever.
And as the narrator says, such an oath had not been heard in Middle-earth since Elendil himself had sworn alliance with Gil-galad, king of the Eldar. And there's a reason for that. His bringing in the name of Eru in this is like off the charts wild. This is not done. This is not a done thing. You don't invoke the name of Eru.
And yet
don't. And yet he did. It's one of those things where only the kings were held to have that authority. And it hadn't been done, well, since Elendil himself had sworn alliance with Gil-galad. So, it's one of those things. They had such reverence for Eru, right? Remember, think about going back to our time on Númenor. They only ascended the Meneltarma as a people 3 times a year. That's the only time anybody could speak there. And it was only the king. And it was only to give thanks to Eru, to pray to Eru, and to give praise to Eru, right? The Eru Laitale, the Eru Hantale, and the Eru Kierme. Ooh, I can't believe I remembered those. Those are not on my notes.
Oh my God. That's not even in the script, folks. There's no notes about those 3 names. Alan's just that good at his job.
No notes.
Woo, okay.
So, you realize that the sort of the very elevated view that they have of Eru, such that they don't even talk about him. It's like the first rule of Eru is don't talk about Eru. And here he is, Cirion, actually invoking the name of Eru for the first time in thousands of years. Really, really impressive stuff. But you know what else is really impressive?
Alan, I'm so proud of you. What?
You're reading about Sauron, Don.
I'm starting to rub off. My influence and power grows day by day.
Day by day, that's right.
This is, however, my last episode on the podcast for the time being.
It's nice that you finally rubbed off of me. It's just unfortunate that you're leaving now. Yeah.
At least I know my work is done. We carry on.
We do.
It was in the days of Baragon that the war of the dwarves and orcs was fought in the Misty Mountains in 2793 to 99, of which only rumor came south, until the orcs, fleeing from Nanduhirion, attempted to cross Rohan and establish themselves in the White Mountains. There was fighting for many years in the dales before the danger was ended. When Belecthor II, the 21st steward, died, the White Tree died also in Minas Tirith, but it was left standing until the king returns, for no seedling could be found. In the days of Turin II, the enemies of Gondor began to move again, for Sauron was grown again to power, and the day of his arising was drawing near. All but the hardiest of its people deserted Ecthelion and removed west over Anduin, for the land was infested by Mordor orcs. It was Turin that built secret refuges for his soldiers in Ecthelion, of which Henneth Anun was the longest guarded and manned. He also fortified again the Isle of Caer Andros to defend Anorion, but his chief peril lay in the south, where the Haradrim had occupied South Gondor, and there was much fighting along the Poros. When Ecthelion was invaded in great strength, King Fulquina of Rohan fulfilled the oath of Eorl and repaid his debt for the aid brought by Baragon, sending many men to Gondor. With their aid, Turin won a victory at the crossing of the Poros, but the sons of Fulquine both fell in the battle. The riders buried them after the fashion of their people, and they were laid in one mound, for they were twin brothers. Long it stood, Howth in Guanor, high upon the shore of the river, and the enemies of Gondor feared to pass it. Turgon followed Turin, but of his time it is chiefly remembered that 2 years ere his death, Sauron rose again, and declared himself openly, and he re-entered Mordor, long prepared for him. Then the Barad-dûr was raised once more, and Mount Doom burst into flames, and the last of the folk of Ecthelion fled far away. When Turgon died, Saruman took Isengard for his own and fortified it.
Wow, lots happening here. I mean, we did skip at the beginning of this section a fairly lengthy paragraph on the 19th and 20th stewards. Those were Beren and Baragon, and this is quite a bit later than Cirion, right? Cirion was the 12th steward. Those incidents happened around 2510. And we're looking at 250 years later or so now.
There's definitely some danger for Beren as the Steward of Gondor. 3 huge fleets of Umbar and Harad come up and attack Gondor. They landed as far as the mouth of the Isen, actually.
That's a lot further north than you might be imagining. I'm looking at the map. Take a look. We think about the southern part of Gondor, right? All the rivers coming south from the White Mountains all the way west to the Anfalas and even to the peninsula called Andrast. Yeah, it's further north than that, isn't it?
Yeah, you'd have to then turn up the corner and go north. This is past the east-west line of the White Mountains to find the mouth of the Isen, and that is the river that flows through, wait for it, Isengard,
of course,
and then heads south, basically making a hard turn for the west after the fords of the Isen.
That's right. So the mouth of the Isen is as far north of, let's say, the Anfalas as the haven of Umbar is south of the mouths of the Anduin.
That's quite a bit.
Yeah, it's a big chunk.
And unfortunately, the Rohirrim cannot help this time because they are being attacked from both sides and they had to retreat into the White Mountains. So when you ask where was Gondor,
yeah, where was Rohan when Gondor needed some help?
Yeah, where was Rohan when Gondor needed help?
Exactly. Well, this is the war in Rohan that took the lives of Helm Hammerhand and his sons. And I got to say, I'm getting so excited for the War of the Rohirrim.
I cannot wait. Yeah. Especially those scenes that we're going to see about the long winter, because it was the long winter causing a lot of problems. Not quite as bad in Gondor, but definitely up north. The following spring, this is the year 2759, Beren's son Baragon drove out the last of the attackers from Umbar and Harad. He then immediately, good for him, sent help to Rohan.
That's right. Now, Baragon is described in that paragraph that we skipped as the greatest captain since Boromir, and we saw just how good that 11th steward was, taking back Ecthelion. And because it took Rohan longer to recover, that's when Beren gave possession of Orthanc to the wizard Saruman in that same year, 2759.
We then come back to where we did read. We're in the time of Baragon's stewardship, now as we're told of the war between the dwarves and the orcs in the Misty Mountain. And that's not really a problem for Gondor until some of those orcs escaping the Dimrill Dale, it's the Cinder and Nandû-Hirion, they try to set up shop in the White Mountains, which is a big no-no.
Yeah, sorry, no, you can't come here. Now, we do get a brief mention of the 21st steward, Belecthor II, and that's because when he died, the White Tree died. Now, here in the text, that year isn't given, but it's Third Age 2872. It's almost 150 years before the events of the War of the Ring.
It really must be a downer in the history books to have your death be mentioned basically alongside
We only know one thing that happened during your reign, and it's that when you died, the tree died.
Bummer.
And the gardeners didn't want to do anything about it. They just left the tree there.
Samwise Gamgee would never. Anyway, we skip forward past Belecthor's son, the 22nd steward Thorongil, and we arrive at the days of the 23rd Turin II.
And it is a bad time to be steward because the threats are manifold.
Oh, yeah.
Sauron is rising again. All of Gondor's enemies are moving.
And prom is tomorrow.
That's great. That's
Thank
great.
you.
I love that.
Thank you. Now, keep in mind, Osgiliath was abandoned more than 400 years prior. It's only now that Ecthelion is essentially abandoned as well.
That's right. But not before Turin builds Heneth-Anun and strengthens Cairandros as a defense for the northern part of Gondor. That northern part of Gondor is Anorian.
Yeah, and the challenges in Ecthelion are really kind of the least of his worries because oopsie, the Haradrim are back, and they're also fighting along the Poros.
That's right. Now, the Poros, if you look at the map, it's not a river that's mentioned very many other times, if at all. It's a river that has its source in the southern part of the Ephel-Duath, that's the Mountains of Shadow. It runs west from there and then curves north, hitting the Anduin just before the Anduin itself reaches the sea. And it acts as a boundary between South Gondor and South Ecthelion, or Gondor itself.
And so with a big threat on the southern border of Gondor, Rohan comes to the aid of Turin II, which not only honors that oath because they're not busy, but they're also, returning the favor from when Turin's great-grandfather Baragon helped save Rohan.
That's right. Now, those combined forces were able to secure a victory against the Haradrim, but that victory came at the cost of the twin sons of Fulquina. Now, as we'll read in the House of Eorl, actually, I think in a couple of episodes with Matt, Fulquina wished to lead his men himself, but was dissuaded, and his twin sons, Fulkred and Fastred, went in his stead, both dying at the age of 27.
Oof. Now, fortunately, at least for Rohan, Fulquina had 4 children, and his remaining son, Thengel, became king of Rohan in 2903. Thengel was the grandfather of King Theoden.
That's right. Fengel had his son Thengel, who had his son Theoden. And think about it, if Fulquina's eldest sons, the twin sons Fulkred and Fastred, if they had not died, one of them, whichever one of them was the oldest, would have become the king, and Theoden would not have been the king 2 generations later.
Whoa.
Very interesting. Well, Rohan did the Rohan thing. They buried the twin sons in a mound, just as the kings in Rohan were buried, 7 mounds upon the left and 9 upon the right, Aragorn said as they approached Meduseld.
But while the 9 on the right would have been true at this point, with that final one being that of Helm Hammerhand, there would have only been 4 on the left at this point. And as they were twins, the riders buried them in a single mound.
Right. Now, that mound, of course, located over here near the River Poros rather than near Meduseld, was named in Sindarin Hauth in Gwanur, which likely means burial mound of the twins. And we know that Hauth is a funeral mound. We see that in Hauth en Nirnaeth, that's the Hill of the Slain, as well as Hauth en Arwen, the Lady Barrow, which is not where Arwen is buried. It's just Lady. It's not where Arwen was buried because we know she just laid herself down on Caer Namroth to die. It's instead where Haleth of the Haladin was buried in the First Age.
And Gwanur is actually translated for us where else in the blah, 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 blah.
Arma El Delamberon 17. Say it with me, folks.
Thank you so much, Alan. As pair of twins.
That's right.
So we've
That's
got
Gwanur.
it.
And as is often the place with the burial sites of heroes, the bad guys are afraid to go near it. I love that.
I don't blame him. I wouldn't want to go near the Parmesan Eggplant 17 either. After Torrin II, we get the 24th steward, Torgon. There is nothing to say about him regarding his stewardship. Nothing good, that is, we should say.
Well, nothing. It's not like it's bad about him per se. It's just that bad things happened while he was in charge. It wasn't his fault, but while he was in office, Sauron announced his plans for world domination, went back to Mordor, remodeled Barad-dûr, took it down to the studs, rebuilt it, and pushed the start button on Mount Doom.
Oh, it has a start button? Well, why didn't they just turn it off?
Yeah, it's shaped like a sword. And you got to get a guy named Waldreg to put it. No, I'm kidding.
This podcast will contain spoilers for The Rings of Power, Season 1.
Season 1. If you haven't seen that 2.5 years ago, yeah. I have only one word to say here, pyroclastic. Anyway.
Oh, no. Come on.
I know.
We carry on.
All right.
Also worth mentioning, when this steward died, Saruman essentially rejected any pretense of renting Orthanc and instead decided to take all of Isengard and just fortify it. This is mine now.
I shall name this unto myself and this unto myself. I mean, that's what Morgoth did, so why not? Yeah.
Speaking of renting, Alan, my throat's a little parched. Do you think I could rent out your reading voice for a few more minutes as you read the next section?
You can. I'm going to read about the Eagle of the Star. Ecthelion II, son of Turgon, was a man of wisdom. With what power was left to him, he began to strengthen his realm against the assault of Mordor. He encouraged all men of worth from near or far to enter his service, and to those who proved trustworthy, he gave rank and reward. In much that he did, he had the aid and advice of a great captain whom he loved above all. Thorongil, men called him in Gondor, the Eagle of the Star, for he was swift and keen-eyed, and wore a silver star upon his cloak. But no one knew his true name, nor in what land he was born. He came to Ecthelion from Rohan, where he had served the king Thengel, but he was not one of the Rohirrim. He was a great leader of men by land or by sea, but he departed into the shadows whence he came, before the days of Ecthelion were ended. Thorongil often counseled Ecthelion that the strength of the rebels in Umbar was a great peril to Gondor, and a threat to the fiefs of the south that would prove deadly if Sauron moved to open war. At last he got leave of the steward and gathered a small fleet, and he came to Umbar unlooked for by night, and there burned a great part of the ships of the corsairs. He himself overthrew the captain of the haven in battle upon the quays, and then he withdrew his fleet with small loss. But when they came back to Pelargir, to men's grief and wonder, he would not return to Minas Tirith, where great honor awaited him. He sent a message of farewell to Ecthelion, saying, "Other tasks now call me, Lord, and much time and many perils must pass ere I come again to Gondor, if that be my fate." Though none could guess what those tasks might be, nor what summons he had received, it was known whither he went, for he took boat and crossed over Anduin, and there he said farewell to his companions and went on alone, and when he was last seen, his face was towards the mountains of shadow. There was dismay in the city at the departure of Thorongil, and to all men it seemed a great loss, unless it were to Denethor, the son of Ecthelion, a man now ripe for the stewardship, to which after 4 years he succeeded on the death of his father. Denethor II was a proud man, tall, valiant, and more kingly than any man that had appeared in Gondor for many lives of men, and he was wise also, and far-sighted, and learned in lore. Indeed, he was as like to Thorongil as to one of nearest kin, and yet was ever placed second to the stranger in the hearts of men and the esteem of his father. At the time, many thought that Thorongil had departed before his rival became his master, though indeed Thorongil had never himself vied with Denethor, nor held himself higher than the servant of his father. And in one matter only were their counsels to the steward at variance. Thorongil often warned Ecthelion not to put trust in Saruman the White in Isengard, but to welcome rather Gandalf the Grey. But there was little love between Denethor and Gandalf, and after the days of Ecthelion there was less welcome for the Grey Pilgrim in Minas Tirith. Therefore, later, when all was made clear, many believed that Denethor, who was subtle in mind and looked further and deeper than other men of his day, had discovered who this stranger Thorongil in truth was, and suspected that he and Mithrandir designed to supplant him.
Houston, we have a problem.
Indeed we do. Yeah.
So we are on steward number 25, inching closer and closer to the time frame we are familiar with in the story. Not quite there yet, but we're getting there.
Mm-hmm. And Ecthelion II, son of Turgon, turns out to be one of the good ones. As Sauron had begun to grow and openly declare himself in his father's stewardship, he knew that his job was to help Gondor become stronger for that inevitable attack from Mordor.
He did this by basically offering rank and reward to all men of worth. This is not just the men that could prove their Dunedain lineage. Basically, in other words, the Northmen could get something as well.
I love that because, of course, I mean, you think about the kin strife and how it was, all about, purity this and purity that.
Yeah.
We learned that he accomplished much of his best work with the help of a man by the name of Thorongil, which the text says means the eagle of the star. That's, of course, precisely what the word nerdery would tell you. Thoron is eagle, as in Thorondor, as well as in the name of Aragorn's father, Arathorn. And Gil means star, as in Gil-galad or Osgiliath. So eagle of the star.
Love that. He got this moniker in Gondor because he was swift and keen-eyed like an eagle, but wore a silver star, as rangers tend to do, I assume. I've never met one in the wild. But
that's true. Last time I met a ranger, I can't remember anymore, actually.
Yeah. And that was kind of sort of his epithet, like not his real name. Like there's no 72 in my name, actually. Sorry to tell you it like this, Alan.
That's totally fair. Yeah,
but no one knew his real name.
That's the thing. They all knew that was his epithet. They just called him that because they didn't have a real name for him. But we know his real name, right? I mean, look, it's pretty obvious just from the stories, folks. But we are told explicitly in Appendix B, that's in the Tale of Years, that from 2957 to 2980, Aragorn undertakes his great journeys and errantries. As Thorongil, he serves in disguise both Thengel of Rohan and Ecthelion II of Gondor.
So where did he come from? Well, no one really knows that any more than they knew his real name, but they do know that before he came to Gondor, he served King Thengel in Rohan.
Now, wherever he came from, he must have gone back because he left before Ecthelion's time as steward was complete. Ecthelion ruled from 2953 to 2984, and Thorongil left in 2980, 4 years before Ecthelion's death.
So now we get some very specific stories of some of Thorongil's accomplishments. He continued to advise Ecthelion of the danger that Umbar posed. Think about how many times the Corsairs had attacked over the course of those preceding centuries.
Over and over again since the kin strife. And of course, they're more than just a threat to the kingdom as a whole. Specifically, as Thorongil explains to him, they are a threat to the fiefs of the south. And that specifically calls to mind the problem that Gondor faced as war approached in 3019. If you remember, the southern fiefs couldn't send all their strength, all the strength that Minas Tirith needed, and it was precisely because of the threat of the Corsairs.
Yeah, trying to divide and conquer, basically. So it was that when Aragorn basically showed up, all gallant and royal, as we read in the previous passage, to defeat them at Pelargir and take their ships, the entire tide of the battle gets turned, and he knew this 40 years beforehand.
He knew how important it was to keep the Corsairs, in check.
Absolutely.
Now, Ecthelion does appear to have just simply told him, you handle it. So he did. He puts together a small fleet, a little raiding party. They come to Umbar at night. They sneak in. They burn a lot of the ships. And he even managed to kill the captain of the Haven on the docks before getting him and his ships out of there with very few casualties. So a successful raid.
Love to see that leader in him. Not surprisingly, as soon as they get back and tell the tale of the victory, they want to give him a very great honor, but he's not coming back.
No.
Instead, he sent a note to the steward. Hey, it's been really great. I do have to go. Thanks so much for having me. But at the very least, he didn't get ghosted completely.
No, that's true. I mean, he got the note, right? It was like,
he got the note.
Got to go, man. In all seriousness, I love the part of his message where he says, ere I come again to Gondor, if that be my fate. He isn't just saying, if I pass this way again. He's talking about his coming return as the king. I love that. And of course, when he left, the text tells us that he was facing towards Mordor, right? His face towards the Mountains of Shadow. Interestingly, though, we know that later in that same year, per the Tale of Years, he came to Lothlorien, where on midsummer, Arwen plighted her troth.
It wasn't until the year 3009, this is 29 years later, when Aragorn hunted and captured Gollum.
Yeah, and that's relevant because I don't know about you, but that's what I thought he must have. Oh, he's headed towards Mordor. Oh, it must be when he goes, oh, wait, no, that's not for 29 more years. Now, everybody in Minas Tirith saw Thorongil's departure as a big loss, everybody except Ecthelion's son, Denethor II. And while we'll cover his rule as steward shortly, the rest of this reading talks about his just plain jealousy of Thorongil.
Yeah, it's hard not to be jealous of Thorongil, the guy that is definitely not the king in disguise. Nudge, nudge, wink.
Definitely not, no.
Part of me thinks that Denethor maybe knew or had an inkling. I've always kind of thought that, it's just sort of chip on his shoulder.
The text even gives us that clue. Like, he must have had some sort of guess. He must have maybe figured out who Thorongil really was.
Because Denethor, especially in the books, he's quite the guy. He's very tall. He's valiant. He's described as kingly and wise and learned. He's far-sighted.
All of these things.
But he was always second place to Thorongil.
That's right. And notice in the text, this is interesting. It wasn't just in the minds of the people, though he certainly was. It was even in the esteem of his father. So it's not really a shock to me to see Denethor treating his sons differently from each other. Like, hurt people,
generational trauma.
Yeah, exactly.
Generational trauma. The cycle will repeat itself. Not surprisingly, a lot of the people figured that Thorongil left because he didn't want to have to work for Denethor.
I'm not working for that guy.
It's like, hey, this boss is retiring and the guy's
new
son
boss,
is taking
not
over.
The same as the old boss. Yeah.
No. We do read, though, that Thorongil never saw them as competing. He was very humble in his role.
Which fits Aragorn to a T, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But since Denethor was, as we mentioned a minute ago, wise, far-sighted, and learned, well, it turns out that he and Thorongil actually gave virtually the same counsels to Ecthelion, except on one topic only. It turns out that Thorongil, can we just call him Aragorn? I mean, just want to move on.
I think we can. Yeah.
He advised Ecthelion to trust Gandalf, not Saruman.
Whew. But Denethor, as can be obviously seen in The Return of the King, not a fan of Gandalf.
No.
And once he became steward, Gandalf was, let's just say, less welcome.
Exactly.
And it does kind of make some folks wonder, since Denethor was, in fact, very wise and farsighted, maybe he discovered who Thorongil was and believed that, maybe there was a plot to remove him and bring this Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and I tell you now, I will not bow to this ranger from the north, into the kingship. Sorry,
a line long bereft of lordship.
We blacked out there for a second quoting the movie.
It happens. Well, quoting the books in that case, I love it when the movies quote the books. That's when it shines the most, right?
It's a beautiful thing.
Well, this whole idea about Denethor rejecting Thorongil and being opposed to his possible elevation to the kingship goes back to that line we read earlier. It was impossible that any king should return, Tolkien wrote, unless he were a descendant of Elendil from Isildur, not Anarion. But from Pelennor onwards, the ruling stewards were determined not to receive any such claimant, but to remain supreme rulers of Gondor. So if he even suspected that Thorongil was of the line of Isildur, he was going to be very strongly opposed to his presence even in Gondor. But how would he have discovered? I mean, look, here's the thing we know about Denethor later. He did, of course, use the Palantir and learned many things from it. But that was something he started doing only after he was steward. He wouldn't have had the authority or even the access to the Palantir until after he became steward. And yet this hostility towards Thorongil happened when he was still not steward, right? When Ecthelion was steward, and Denethor just clearly didn't like this guy. What do we think happened that might have caused him to learn the truth about Thorongil's identity?
So I will potentially liken this to a Game of Thrones comparison, if you'll bear with me for a moment.
Sure, and I'll have to probably just nod my head, somewhat knowingly or pretend knowingly.
It's a season 1 reference where someone's hair color is mentioned as being a dominant trait in that family line.
Okay.
And that is when you discover that the person that is on the throne is not actually of the sort of bloodline of that king. So my guess, because, DNA tests, try as we might, don't exist in Middle-earth, at least as far as I know. So it's essentially a word of mouth and a power thing. But for me, it almost feels as though Denethor is making either an educated guess or just straight up doesn't like him. Now, obviously, Thorongil being Aragorn, he's trying to avoid that kin strife. So I see this as a kind of hostile, tense moment where not everything might be said out in the open because obviously Aragorn didn't reveal himself. But when you just stare at someone for long enough And there's that, that Weird Al song, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and he looks at me,
Weird Al on
and I look at him. I just imagine this staring contest, maybe like at the dinner table one night or a council meeting.
You think about the staring contest between Denethor and Gandalf that we read about in The Lord of the Rings. And Pippin's like, it's almost like seeing fire go between their eyes, right? I mean, there is a perception. Oh, maybe that's what it is. Think about this. We've noticed before, and actually there is something mentioned here about Denethor being able to read men. Think about Faramir and how incredibly perceptive he was. He was able to determine things and figure things out long before anybody said anything, right? He just he didn't read your mind per se, but he was very good.
It's an intuition.
Yeah, very good at perceiving the truth. Denethor shared that same trait, again, because the blood of Númenor ran mostly true in both of them. I think that might have had something to do with it. Like, he wouldn't have known for sure, but it was an educated guess. I mean, after all, if you're already tall and kingly and valiant and wise and all these things, and yet you encounter somebody who's maybe a little taller, maybe a little more valiant, maybe a little more kingly and a little more wise, you think to yourself, I know the blood of Númenor runs pretty true in me. Oh, man, I think it might run true in him. And guess what? He doesn't have a beard. So
that's a great point. Oh, you know what? You know what I'm thinking of now? There's probably a moment where Thorongil Aragorn is walking by past some tapestry, and the steward and Denethor are there too, and someone points out, Thorongil, Elendil looks just like you. Wait a minute. Hang on.
That's right. Yeah, that might have been it. I like that. That.
Folks, we are going to make like Thorongil and take a little break from where we were to go do an ad read.
There you go. We're not going to Mordor. Now, folks, if you're enjoying the PPP, please consider supporting the show by joining the Fellowship of the Podcast. It's what gives me the time and the resources to work on making this show better every season and hopefully every episode. I don't know. You be the judge. When you join,
think you're doing great.
Well, I don't know. It's going to get better next episode because Matt's coming in and you're taking it.
Wow.
Oh, see what I did there?
I do see what you did there. You see how I'm scooting back out of the door?
And now I'm soloing the rest of this episode. No.
Good luck.
Anyway, folks, really, truly, your support is what gives me the ability to work on this show as hard as I do. And when you join, you get the best Discord community around. That includes live episodes, hangouts every month. You also can get episode postscripts, which are a ton of fun. You get an ad-free episode feed, free merch, and more.
You can also become part of our Questions After Nightfall episodes. You can even join us as a guest in the North Wing. So please go to patreon.com/prancingponypod to show your support, to give Alan money, and more importantly, to give Alan money so he can give me money to join him as a guest host on this podcast. Make sure you join the Fellowship of the Podcast.
That's right. Well, folks, you can always help us out also by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts and giving us a rating on Spotify. And please recommend us to your friends. Speaking of friends, Don, it's time for you to talk about the rule of Denethor.
Denethor had married late, 2976, taking as his wife Finduilas, daughter of Adrahil of Dol Amroth. She was a lady of great beauty and gentle heart, but before 12 years had passed, she died. Denethor loved her, in his fashion, more dearly than any other, unless it were the elder of his sons that she bore him. But it seemed to men that she withered in the guarded city, as a flower of a seaward vale set upon a barren rock. The shadow in the east filled her with horror, and she turned her eyes ever south to the sea that she missed. After her death, Denethor became more grim and silent than before, and would sit long alone in his tower deep in thought, foreseeing that the assault of Mordor would come in his time. It was afterwards believed that needing knowledge, but being proud, and trusting in his own strength of will, he dared to look in the palantir of the White Tower. None of the stewards had dared to do this, nor even the kings Eärnil and Eärnor. After the fall of Minas Ithil, when the palantir of Isildur came into the hands of the enemy. For the stone of Minas Tirith was the palantir of Anarion, most close in accord with the one that Sauron possessed. In this way, Denethor gained his great knowledge of things that passed in his realm, and far beyond his borders, at which men marveled. But he bought the knowledge dearly, being aged before his time by his contest with the will of Sauron. Thus, pride increased in Denethor, together with despair, until he saw in all the deeds of that time only a single combat between the Lord of the White Tower and the Lord of Barad-dûr, and mistrusted all others who resisted Sauron, unless they served himself alone.
Oh, man, that is so telling. That is so telling.
It's tragic, too. It really is.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that Sauron's looking to do, right? I mean, he knows that fighting a united front is going to be much more difficult. So, if he can get Denethor to be isolated and trust nobody else, even if they are on the side of good, well, that's going to accomplish a lot. But going back to the beginning, actually before the beginning, in a couple of lines we skipped, we learned that Denethor became steward in 2984. And as we might guess, he ruled in his own particular idiom, sir. He micromanaged. And that's actually how I read holding the rule of all things in his own hand. The guy didn't want to delegate, right? That's how I'm reading that.
Yeah, he wanted to do everything himself. Yeah, he didn't talk much, and while he listened to advice, he did basically whatever he thought he should do, not really following any guidance.
That's right. That actually makes me think of what we learn about Feanor. Do you remember this line? Few ever changed his courses by counsel, none by force.
Well, there was that one Balrog that kind of changed.
Yeah, changed his...
We don't talk about that Balrog.
Changed his mind about living, actually. Yeah. There's a little bit of Feanor in him, right? The pride, the sitting long alone in his tower, deep in thought. I definitely get some vibes there. But
for sure.
Picking up where you read, Don, we read about Denethor's marriage to Finduilas, the daughter of the then Prince of Dol Amroth, Adrahil. And I want to look briefly at this tragically short timeline.
Yeah, so at the time he married Finduilas in 2976, the text said he married late. He was 46. She was 26. He was also not yet steward, as we read earlier, coming into that office in 2984. So that is 8 years after he was married.
Right. Now, she was the daughter of the then Prince of Dol Amroth, Adrahil, and the brother of Imrahil, who would become the prince himself much later in 3010. And it was only 2 years into their marriage that Boromir was born, so 2978. 5 years after that, in 2983, Faramir was born.
A year after Faramir's birth, Denethor becomes steward. This is in the year 2984. Then 4 years later, in 2988, Finduilas dies at only the age of 38. Faramir is 5, Boromir is 10.
And 38 is very young for her lineage. I mean, her grandfather died at 111 years old, her father at 93. Her brother, Imrahil, will die when he's 100. So very long-lived bloodline. Yeah.
As for Finduilas herself, we are told that she was both very beautiful and gentle, but, and I love how Tolkien uses this word, she withered in Minas Tirith. She missed the sea. She was filled with horror, living basically on Mordor's doorstep and under that constant shadow of Mordor.
And speaking as somebody who was born and raised in California, not coastal, I didn't live on the coast, but I will tell you, I don't know that I could live inland, that I could go and live in a state far away from the ocean. There's something about the sea and being near the sea. I would miss it dearly. Yeah. I would wither, but I'm also well past her age. she died at 38. I passed that long ago. That's in that objects may appear closer than they appear side mirror there.
Maybe that's why some of the elves are so scared to hear the sea, because they know as soon as they get to that Caribbean beach style vacation thing, they're I've been living the wrong life. Undying Lands, here I come.
I'm wondering if Tol Eressëa is just an all-inclusive resort, really, that's the problem. I'm reminded, as we talk about Finduilas, I'm reminded of the cloak that Faramir gave to Éowyn that was actually made for Finduilas. And we read this in The Steward and the King. They were clad in warm raiment and heavy cloaks, and over all the Lady Éowyn wore a great blue mantle of the color of deep summer night, and it was set with silver stars about hem and throat. Faramir had sent for this robe and had wrapped it about her, and he thought that she looked fair and queenly indeed as she stood there at his side. The mantle was wrought for his mother, Finduilas of Amroth, who died untimely, and was to him but a memory of loveliness in far days and of his first grief. And her robe seemed to him raiment fitting for the beauty and sadness of Éowyn. I love that. The beauty and sadness.
I do love the word raiment here, because raiment is sort of something that we hear the Valar garbing themselves in a raiment, and here it almost seems to be like some sort of protection of or like a sigil of her beauty and potentially also her sadness.
I like that combination of beauty and sadness. I feel like there's a lot of that in Tolkien, right? I mean, I think about Nienna and the tears, and how, you know, the two together are always so poignant. And in this case, of course, for Faramir, he doesn't remember his mother. He was 5 when she died.
Yeah.
I don't remember anything. Well, I'm probably a bad example. I don't remember anything from before I was like 12, right? But I know people can remember when they were little. But he wouldn't have very specific or very clear memories of her, almost certainly.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that might come from the relationship that he has with his father, with Denethor. Because it is clear from the text, to me at least, Denethor did genuinely love her, but in his own particular way, as Tolkien mentions. Yeah. So maybe not more so, though, than Boromir. So Faramir is seeing this sort of love that Denethor is capable of. It's just not necessarily directed at him or potentially his mother.
Yeah. I mean, you know, Denethor did love Finduilas in his way, but, you know, certainly Faramir, not so much, right? Faramir says, you know, my father sent me a get well card. Boromir's like, oh, really? That's kind of him. Faramir's like, I wasn't sick. He just wanted me to get better. It's just so terrible. I mean, Father of the Year award stuff right there.
Oh, my goodness. That is, you know, I feel like Denethor tells a really cruel dad joke every now and then,
absolutely.
Just to really rub it in
Faramir.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. Knife in the back sort of stuff, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of more tragic stuff, as Finduilas dies, this tragedy continues to sort of weigh on Denethor, and this leads him to become more and more, you know, quiet, unapproachable, and almost downright grim.
Totally grim, right? But some of that grimness came before her death, as we'll see later. Now, we often give Denethor a hard time, and rightly so. We would do well, though, to remember that he was more learned in lore than any steward for many generations. And we find that in Heirs of Elendil and Peoples of Middle-earth. And, of course, as we've talked about before, in The Lord of the Rings, we learned that the blood of Westernesse runs nearly true in him. So keep that in mind. He is still an incredibly noble and wise person.
Yeah, and even with all of this Númenorian wisdom, this very learned man makes a very fateful choice that essentially changes the course of everything, to look into the Palantir of the White Tower, even though, probably for good reason, none of the stewards had ever made an attempt to do this, even though none of the stewards had ever made an attempt to do this.
Right. And they did have the authority to do that, right? I mean, we know that they had all the authority of the kings, and the kings did have the authority to use the Palantir. And in fact, we read later on that the only reason he was even able to use this Palantir successfully to some extent was because he had the right legal and moral authority to use it, unlike Saruman, who may have had more power but didn't have the right to use it. Anyway, that's a bit of a digression. The last 2 kings, by the way, of Gondor also didn't look into the stone, but there's a reason for that. They knew that its closest stone, the one that it was closest in accord with, I'm picturing them now on the passenger seat of a Honda Accord, and they're next to each other, that stone was now in the hands of the enemy, and the last thing they wanted was to be looking into the face of Sauron. So they knew better, because that stone was in the possession of Mordor. Now, sure, using the Palantir gave Denethor some useful intelligence, but it came at a very, very high price. He was aged before his time, which I'm feeling called out, but it increased his pride and despair as well.
Yeah, so while the PPP, I know you are going to look into the chapter in Unfinished Tales on the Palantir. That's going to be basically at length next season. You're going to find out how they worked, what they did not do. And you guys are, I assume, just going to find out way more about how Denethor used it.
And I don't even know who it's going to be. It might even be you that comes back next season on the Palantir. I don't know where that's going to come in the season yet. I do roadmap, but I only roadmap one season at a time. Thank you very much. That's what I use my hiatus for. Yeah.
I love it.
So in the chapter, The Pyre of Denethor, Gandalf says that in the days of his wisdom, Denethor would not presume to use it to challenge Sauron, knowing the limits of his own strength.
But right after that, Gandalf points out Denethor's wisdom failed him, and that he must have looked into the stone and then been tricked. But Christopher Tolkien, chiming in Unfinished Tales, points out that Gandalf should have been reported as saying that he did not think Denethor had presumed to use it until his wisdom failed.
Right. I mean, after all, Gandalf could not have known for certain because Denethor's use of the stone was, quote, a matter of conjecture. And we go on to learn in that Unfinished Tales bit that it is probable, considering Denethor and what is said about him, that he began to use the Anor stone many years before 3019 and earlier than Saruman ventured or thought it useful to use the Stone of Orthanc.
I've always liked that conception that sort of thing has happened, because that moment that we get of Ungoliant, and it is said that she devoured herself in her hunger, and these tales and legends, and there's spooky ghost stories in universe, but I think Tolkien is certainly dropping a few hints there, at least in my reading of it.
Yeah, I agree as well.
As this sort of goes on, we're reminded of some of the traits of Denethor, not just that wisdom, that learnedness, but the fact that he is strong-willed. He is also very, confident in his own power, and for a good reason. He's very dauntless. But then later, it seems fairly plain that he had at once turned to the stone as soon as he came to power, having long studied the matter of the Palantir and the traditions regarding them and their use preserved in the special archives of the stewards.
Now, why would he do that? Well, the text tells us that too. In the latter years of his father's rule as steward, Denethor is said to have greatly desired to consult the stone. And guess why? We talked about this earlier. Because of the fame of Thorongil and the favor shown to him by his father.
Oh, is it now a self-fulfilling prophecy that does Aragorn not showing up cause Denethor to not look into the Palantir, to then not fall into darkness, and to rule as steward and potentially welcome Aragorn?
That's an interesting notion. Like if he doesn't, like if Thorongil had not shown up or had left a lot earlier before he really got Denethor's ire,
hadn't made the impact.
I still think Denethor would have eventually looked. It's just that this text tells us that he looked really early on. Like as soon as he became steward, he at once turned to the stone, primarily because of the fame of Thorongil. So maybe he holds off and doesn't go until later. But either way, he's going to end up with the despair and the pride, and he's going to be locked in the way Sauron intends. Yeah,
it's going to be a really bad time, but that's just like what I would do if I were ever elected president. I'm immediately going to Area 51.
Straight to the Palantir.
Yeah.
This elf stone is your president.
Plainly put, at least one of his motives must have been jealousy of Thorongil and hostility to Gandalf, to whom, during the ascendancy of Thorongil, his father paid much attention. Denethor desired to surpass these usurpers in knowledge and information, and also, if possible, to keep an eye on them when they were elsewhere.
Which is one of the powers of the Palantir. And again, though, that comes at the cost of great strain. And this is sad. A footnote to this section gives us the heartbreaking punchline of this whole bit. The use of the Palantiri was a mental strain, especially on men of later days not trained to the task. And no doubt, in addition to his anxieties, this strain contributed to Denethor's grimness. It was probably felt earlier by his wife than by others, and increased her unhappiness to the hastening of her death.
Ooh, what was that I said about twisting the knife?
Yeah, this is tragic. Denethor's use of the Palantir changes his personality, right? Adds this strain, this stress that she feels more closely than anybody else, leading to her premature death. His use of the Palantir can be connected to her early death.
I almost want to call this cliche, because like the bad guy using the thing to save, this is basically Walter White, but in Minas Tirith, maybe. I'm using all of this knowledge and power to save us and save our family, and then all of a sudden, it's accidentally killed my wife.
Yeah. Oh man, that's bad.
So not quite Breaking Bad, but we're getting there.
Breaking Palantir, yeah. It's so sad. I mean, that Finduilas's life ends early because of the strain in her marriage to Denethor, precisely because of his use of the stone, which comes back to his jealousy of Thorongil.
Wow, it's so weird. If I had a nickel for every time a male character in a Lord of the Rings sort of story had a stone that he was kind of obsessed with that had a huge problem on his entire life, especially his marriage, I'd have a few more nickels than I think you'd care to admit, but
you
at least
wouldn't be rich,
two.
but it is weird that it happens so often. Yeah.
Yeah, it's happened a lot.
Yeah.
Anyway, tragedy or no, at the end, this extended use of the stone basically leads Denethor to not trust anyone else on his side of the fight unless they are serving him directly.
That's the thing. He doesn't care. He doesn't trust even Rohan. He doesn't trust anybody.
You know what I trust,
What's
Alan?
that? What do you trust?
I trust that you are going to read the next passage.
Oh, of course I will. It's a short one, but it's beautiful, and it wraps up the whole section on the stewards.
Let's do it.
So time drew on to the War of the Ring, and the sons of Denethor grew to manhood. Boromir, 5 years the elder, beloved by his father, was like him in face and pride, but in little else. Rather, he was a man after the sort of King Eärnur of old, taking no wife, and delighting chiefly in arms, fearless and strong, but caring little for lore, save the tales of old battles. Faramir the younger was like him in looks, but otherwise in mind. He read the hearts of men as shrewdly as his father, but what he read moved him sooner to pity than to scorn. He was gentle in bearing, and a lover of lore and of music, and therefore by many in those days his courage was judged less than his brother's. But it was not so, except that he did not seek glory and danger without a purpose. He welcomed Gandalf at such times as he came to the city, and he learned what he could from his wisdom. And in this, as in many other matters, he displeased his father. Yet between the brothers there was great love, and had been since childhood, when Boromir was the helper and protector of Faramir. No jealousy or rivalry had arisen between them since, for their father's favor or for the praise of men. It did not seem possible to Faramir that anyone in Gondor could rival Boromir, heir of Denethor, captain of the White Tower, and of like mind was Boromir. Yet it proved otherwise at the test. But of all that befell these three in the War of the Ring, much is said elsewhere. And after the war, the days of the ruling stewards came to an end, for the heir of Isildur and Anarion returned, and the kingship was renewed, and the standard of the White Tree flew once more from the Tower of Ecthelion.
And here it comes to an end. I will not say do not weep, because, man, if there's going to be a final steward of Gondor, Faramir is that guy.
So glad. I know. Love it.
Love it so much. Thankfully, we get this passage not without mention. His brother Boromir, who is, of course, would have become the ruling steward. Mm-hmm. I personally think he would have made a wonderful steward.
He would have done
any
fine
sort of
too.
one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, again, once he realized what his error, when you look at the Boromir who died at Parthgalen, you're right. This is a guy who would have ended up going on to become a good steward.
I'll have to write another fan fiction what if TTRPG series, don't I?
Yeah, what if he survived, learned his lesson, took that humility, and went on to lead Gondor as steward? And he was the one.
Possibilities are endless, Alan.
Yeah.
Do so much.
Yeah. So while Boromir looked like Denethor and had the same pride, he was really just not like him at all in anything else. And it makes sense, right? We remember that line about the blood of Númenor running nearly true in Denethor and Faramir, but not Boromir, which is interesting. Genetics, I guess. So, he wasn't learned, caring little for lore. He was focused on feats of arms, and it was a lot like Eärnur. That's less of a problem here. We gave Eärnur a little bit of a hard time because being, quote, rather a champion than a captain or king is fine when you're not a king, when you're the son of the steward and not the king. It's perfectly fine to be like that.
Yep, totally fine. Although if he'd become the steward, probably would have been a much bigger problem.
You sort of don't want to just be a champion. You want to be a leader. And he would have been fine as that eventually. But the focus in this section, though, of course, is on Faramir. He's the younger son who would become the ruling steward, even if only for a few weeks, from March 15th, the date of his father's passing, to May 1st, the date of Aragorn's coronation.
Now, he looked like Denethor, but was basically completely different from him in terms of character.
Yes,
he had the same incredible perceptive ability. He's got a very high perception check.
Yeah, he's put bonuses into that. He's rolling advantage every time. Yeah,
for sure. I love this quote: "Read the hearts of men as shrewdly as his father."
And that kind of brings us back to what we talked about with Denethor perceiving who Thorongil was. It's the same thing. They both can read the hearts of men very shrewdly. Yeah.
Yeah. But this was a man that showed, and I love this, pity rather than contempt.
It's so beautiful, and it's such a lesson from Tolkien. I mean, if there's anything that we learn about ourselves and what we need to take from the Lord of the Rings, it's having pity. You think about the power of pity. And I think about the times in Ecthelion, going back to his ability to read people, when Faramir was always a few steps ahead of Frodo and Sam in their conversation, sort of playing 4D chess, like I said. They're playing checkers, and he's like moves ahead of them. Yeah.
Yeah, but Faramir is explicitly described as gentle in bearing, just like his mother Finduilas had been described as having a gentle heart. And also, unlike Boromir, he was a big nerd. I'm just kidding.
He was
a lot like me. He was, yeah. He was known as a lover of lore,
and
which
even of
feels
music.
like a direct call out.
He was definitely one of us. I love that connection, though, with his mother. Gentle in bearing and gentle heart. There's not an accident in the use of the word gentle there. I really love that. Now, we did read about Denethor in The Heirs of Elendil, that he was more learned in lore than any steward for many generations. But this idea that Faramir is a lover of lore feels different, right? He loves the lore because he understands its importance and its inherent value. Denethor, it's never mentioned that he loved the lore, just that he was more learned. And that's because I suspect that for him, it was about the knowledge and the power that the lore could give to him, as opposed to the value inherent in the lore.
It's almost reminding me of that quote, if you see a beautiful flower you love, don't pick it, just let it stay there because that's its place and natural. Something about the seeing something and appreciating it for what it is.
For what it is, for where it belongs, for the role that it plays, for its significance to itself.
And he who breaks a thing to see what is inside has left the path of wisdom.
There you go.
And don't we have kind of a direct comparison here for, this guy who wants to break everything in Denethor and someone who would rather just say, okay, let's let it be. Let's let these little halflings go on their mission. That's not any of my business. Let's go save the world and just let it happen. Now, because of this love for his lore and music as well, combined with his very gentle bearing and the tendency of pity, he was often seen, I would say incorrectly, as less courageous than Boromir.
That's right. And we see a tiny bit of that in part of this quote from The Window on the West. Faramir himself saying, "Though we still hold that a warrior should have more skills and knowledge than only the craft of weapons and slaying, we esteem a warrior nonetheless above men of other crafts. Such is the need of our days. So even was my brother Boromir, a man of prowess, and for that he was accounted the best man in Gondor. And very valiant indeed he was. No heir of Minas Tirith has for long years been so hardy in toil, so onward into battle, or blown a mightier note on the great horn." But because of that, he was accounted the best man in Gondor.
It's what he needed to do to survive and to have his people see him as a leader. That line that says he didn't see glory and danger without a purpose is kind of reminding me of the war must be while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. I love only that which they defend. The city of men of Númenor, and I would have her loved for her memory, her ancientry, her beauty, and her present wisdom. That's one of my favorite Tolkien quotes of all time.
Absolutely. That is top 5, top 10 for sure. Best quotes in all of the Legendarium. It's absolutely...
It's so quintessentially Tolkien. It
isn't it?
Encompasses. If I were to show anyone a quote that says, "What's J.R.R. Tolkien's thing?" Well, I like him if I like fantasy stuff. Here's all of your characters, your themes, your everything summed up in one. There is fighting, there is war, there is glory.
Exactly. This sums up Tolkien being a man of antitheses, right? He's able to reconcile these two truths. That, when you're faced with somebody like Sauron, war has to take place. We don't have an option to be pacifist in the face of Sauron. But that doesn't mean we have to love the weapons and the war and all of these things. We love the warrior, but we don't love the warrior for his glory. We love what the warrior defends. And that's such a deep and important truth in a time of war, in a time of unavoidable war like that. And you think about what war meant to Tolkien and the experience of war and how much he despised the experience of war. I mean, this was a man who lost nearly all of his friends in World War I. This was a man whose son was injured in World War II and whose other son was called into service and was in the Royal Air Force. This is, war is terrifying to him in this sense. His sons are involved. He doesn't want them to have to be involved, but he knows in that context, certainly both in both those times, war must be. Less so in World War I than in World War II. World War I is just war had to be because we had a bunch of alliances and, well, we signed this and now we got to jump in here even though we really have no beef with you. World War II was different. Talk about war having to be. Stopping a force like Hitler from dominating all of Europe and taking over every country. You've got to stand up. You got to fight the bully. You might not want to. You might not want war, but what else are you going to do? And
basically get taken over. And
exactly.
I think that is
learn German very quickly. Yeah.
Like, do you value your freedom?
Yeah.
Faramir, do you value your freedom? Boromir, hobbits, long has my father protected your lands and all of that. This is like, we have had to do this to survive. And I love that.
But even though we have to fight, we don't have to love the weaponry. We don't have to love the fighting for its own sake. Instead, we love what those things protect, what they defend. The city of the men of Númenor. Faramir's so on the nose with this. And you're right. It is one of the most Tolkienian quotes in the Legendarium. I love it.
Yeah.
So we're also told that Faramir welcomed and learned from Gandalf because Faramir, of course, being wise. Now that alone would have earned him his father's wrath because Denethor was convinced that Gandalf and Thorongil were seeking to usurp his power back in the day.
Yeah, that line earlier this episode, but from Pelennor onwards, the ruling stewards were determined not to receive any such claimant, but to remain supreme rulers of Gondor.
That's right. So from his perspective, what Gandalf was doing, no, I'm not going to let that happen. So yeah, he despised Gandalf. So that alone would have put Faramir on his bad side. But we all know how Denethor treated him. It's this final paragraph I love. Despite the fact that Denethor not only favored Boromir, but genuinely disfavored Faramir, the two brothers really deeply, genuinely loved each other. They both held the other in high regard. There was no one could rival my brother. I don't have any siblings, so I can't quite identify with it, but I absolutely love that. That little bit about Boromir being the helper and protector of Faramir, you realize Boromir was 10 when his mother died, but Faramir was 5. Yeah. That role that Boromir would have to take on, so heavy, such a big responsibility for such a little guy.
Yeah, and that's why I give Boromir so much grace when so many people just label 100%. Him the villain. He is a truly tragic character. That scene in the extended edition with the Peter Jackson films, with Boromir celebrating retaking of Gilead.
I love that scene.
That camaraderie is just there. It's visible on screen and just I wish honest to God, I do kind of wish Tolkien had written more prequels about things like that. That I would love some sort of give us more about what was going on in Gondor during that time.
You're right. I love that. I mean, I think about how we just read this stuff about Cirion and Eorl a few sections ago, and it's very short, but we know that he fleshed that out in the tale of Cirion and Eorl and Unfinished Tales.
Yeah.
I want all of these things fleshed out. I want to know all of these ones. I want to know about those twin sons of the King of Rohan who died. I want to know all about that. I want to know all about Boromir and Faramir as young kids growing up in Gondor. All of those things. It's just fantastic. Yeah. But yeah, I did absolutely love that scene with Boromir and Faramir just loving on each other after the recapture of Osgiliath. Yeah, fantastic.
Great moment. So we are brought now, Alan, to the end of the line of ruling stewards who guided Gondor for nearly 1,000 years until one of their kings decided to have a 1 versus 1 fight with a 9-foot-tall demon lord guy.
Pretty much,
Earnor, you're not doing great. Minas Morgul's not that good of a place, my friend.
No, don't go there. No.
Don't go there, ever.
So the heir of Isildur returning and renewing the kingship. I love that line at the very end about the kingship being renewed. That renewal, that's not an accidental word choice here in the appendix. Remember that one of the names that Aragorn took was Envinyatar, and that's Quenya for the renewer. So again, Tolkien using his words very carefully. And that picture at the end of the flag of the kings, that standard of the white tree that I read about earlier, the black flag with the seventh, with the tree in blossom, the stars and the crown, that's flying again over Minas Tirith instead of the simple plain white standard of the stewards. I will say though, of course, this is interesting. I actually caught not so much an error, but I should clarify the last line, the standard of the white tree flew once more from the Tower of Ecthelion. The standard of the white tree never flew from the Tower of Ecthelion because it was built during the stewardship of Ecthelion.
Oh my God.
I just caught that as I was reading it. I'm like, it wouldn't have flown from that, right? Because it's only been around for a few hundred years in comparison to the last time a king was there. But it did fly from atop whatever, something above.
Whatever was there.
Yeah, it's just a nice little pedantic note. I do a lot of pedantic notes. Speaking of which, this is not a mailbag segue, but just a quick line for you. What did the steward Boromir say to his successor?
What?
Cirion, my wayward son.
Oh my God.
You're
I'm
welcome.
going to make you do the rest of this podcast alone.
You're welcome. Anyway, it did not seem possible to Bob and Nob that anyone in Bree could rival Barlaman Butterbur, heir of the pony, captain of the mailbag. Don, what does Barlaman have for us tonight?
Captain of the mailbag. I want that on like big block letters on the door outside, whatever office.
Captain of the mailbag. That's right.
Oh, yes. So today we have a question from Tina from Colorado.
Okay.
She asks, I noticed in the appendices that there is more than one Denethor and more than one Boromir. Mm-hmm. Obviously, in real world history, names often get repeated all of the time.
Henry VIII was the eighth of his name. Yes,
exactly. We got a lot of Henrys. Did Tolkien ever give a reason for these repeated names?
Oh.
And are there any examples that show up? I mean, I assume additional
lots
examples.
Of other examples that show up, actually.
Oh.
This would be a very long show if we talked about all the examples of the names that show up. I'm thinking immediately of Legolas.
Yes, so I have gone into great detail over this, Alan, and I'm wondering if you can comment on a few of these.
Yeah, I'll sit back and let the man cook. Yeah.
This because as you have so often done with words, I find names very fascinating. So when you gave this to me, I'm like, oh, okay, hang on, more than one Denethor? Let me see.
Let's dive in. All right, do it.
Christopher Tolkien gives a wonderful quote that is almost kind of a clarification of his father's work. He says, years later, long after the publication of The Lord of the Rings, he's talking about Glorfindel in this passage. My father gave a great deal of thought to the matter of Glorfindel, and at that time, he wrote, the use of Glorfindel in The Lord of the Rings is one of the cases of the somewhat random use of the names found in the older legends, now referred to as the Silmarillion, which escaped reconsideration in the final published form of The Lord of the Rings. He came to the conclusion that Glorfindel of Gondolin, who fell to his death in combat with the Balrog after the sack of the city, and Glorfindel of Rivendell were one and the same. He was released from Mandos and returned to Middle-earth in the Second Age. I just thought that was very interesting because, we think of Tolkien having all of these inner workings and plots and plans, but also being slightly disjointed. Here he is saying, well, didn't really even consider the use of those names and had to come up with reasons afterwards. That Glorfindel being the same person,
retconning.
Yeah. Because we are also retconning, in a way, characters like Legolas. Yes. Legolas was originally a member of the House of the Tree. He was one of Galdor's scouts. He escapes from the fall of Gondolin and is with the survivors, leads them across, I believe it's Cristhorn, and then after the First Age sort of goes over to Tol Eressëa, which when I was first reading the Silmarillion, I did not catch this. I assumed that was Legolas, and then he came back, and I just wrongly assumed that. Seeing these elves have the same name. However, we would go by the name. He would go by the name, not Legolas anymore. It is, and I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, so I'm throwing it in the chat for Alan to show me up.
Okay.
Because it looks as though it's a beautiful name. I just don't know what it is.
Oh, there's no U. Laikalasse.
Laiqalasse with the umlaut over the E. Laikalasse. So that is the sort of new version of Legolas's name, not the Legolas from the trilogy, who is a separate Legolas.
Was from Gondolin. Interesting. I didn't even remember that. That's such a deep cut, Don.
I didn't get this nickname for no reason, Alan.
Obscure.
Obscure Lord of the Rings facts guy.
The question is whether that adjective applies to the facts or to the guy.
Porque no los dos. Now, I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page here with some names. So, Alan, if it's all right with you, I kind of took a deep dive into names that show up more than once, if you don't mind.
Just in the House of the Stewards alone, you've got, because you've got Turin, and you got Baron, and you've got Baragond, and Ecthelion, and Ecthelion, and Ecthelion, and you've got,
Keep going. You're halfway down the list. I have it all.
Denethors, of course.
Yes,
Tell me more.
We've got, of course, the two Denethors, the Steward of Gondor. Also, steward of Gondor in the Third Age. Also, one of the elf chieftains. One of the original elf chieftains of Gondor. That's the Sylvan elves and the green elves of the Teleri.
Right.
You also have, I think, 3 or 4 different Ecthelions. There's Ecthelion of the Fountain.
Right. He's the one I think of first, right? The one
course. I mean, you kill a Balrog.
Yeah. You get top billing when you kill a Balrog, yeah.
There's not much more you can do besides that. And then we have, it's 3. It's Ecthelion the First and Ecthelion the Second. Those are both stewards. So we've had one Ecthelion. What about second Ecthelion? We also have, and I always found
we're going to beat that joke into the ground, Don.
Every single time. We also have something that I found very interesting. The name Gothmog appears twice.
Yes, I love that name.
This is one of those names that it's so epic I didn't think Tolkien would reuse it, but Gothmog is both a commander of Sauron's army during the Battle of Pelennor Fields. We do not learn of sort of what happens to this.
No, we don't. We don't even know what he is. And I have some fascinating, shall we say, headcanon on that.
Absolutely. We also have Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, and High Captain of Angband. Oh. He died during the fall of Gondor.
Right.
Of course. So.
Oh, man.
Yeah, there are so to answer your question, Tina, yes, there are many real world examples and many Tolkien examples, most of whom are, I guess we can't quite call the stewards royalty, but they do make up a large number of the names that are repeated often in human history like that.
And now I just need to find somebody else named Don to join me next season on the Prancing Pony podcast. Don the Second, you see.
No,
I've had one Don, yes, but what about second?
Oh, Alan.
I've had 1 second breakfast joke, yes, but what about third second breakfast joke?
Oh.
Very
wow,
meta.
This joke has so many layers to it.
I know.
My God. That was Mailbag. I apologize. It was much more of a deep dive into my special interests.
No, I love that. That's exactly why you're here, man. Thank you.
Usually it's a back and forth, but my God, man, I took your philology stuff and I went, ooh, names. My other thing
I'm all
I love.
good now. That's right. I'm in my happy spot. Well, folks, speaking of happy spots, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony podcast. And for my time this season with the incredible Don Marshall. Aglerio, alaitate, praise him with great praise.
Oh, thank you. It has been an absolute pleasure being here.
All well deserved. Folks, we will be off next week for the Thanksgiving weekend here in the U.S., but please be sure to come back in 2 weeks when Matt, the Nerd of the Rings, and I will be joined by a few of our patrons for our 29th quarterly Questions After Nightfall.
Alan and I really want to thank, and I do mean this as my last episode, really want to thank the members of Team PPP, editor Jordan Randalls for dealing with my constant mess-ups and mispronunciations of all of the words from Númenor that Alan gave me, Barleyman Becca Davis, social media manager Casey Hilsey, event and Patreon community coordinator Katie McKenna, who's texting me regularly about all of the stuff that I am doing on this podcast. I appreciate it.
She is host herder extraordinaire. Yes.
She really is. Graphic artist Megan Collins, incredibly talented, and of course, website guru extraordinaire Phil Dean. Thank you all very much for running
also
this.
Númenorian guard Phil Dean from season 1 of Rings of Power. Yes.
What?
Yeah, you didn't know that? I've never told you that?
No.
Yeah, he was one of the Númenorian guards. I'll have to show you some of his scenes. I'm so very sad now that the Númenorian guards got a bigger role in season 2 that he wasn't there anymore, but that's what happens when they move filming from New Zealand back to the UK. He escorted Morvid and Charlie out of the throne room of Númenor in whatever episode that was, where they were there in Númenor, episode 3, I think it was. Yeah.
Phil, if you are listening to this, how does it feel to be living my dream, sir? Very
fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Well, folks, please take a minute to check out theprancingponypodcast.com. That's where you're going to find show notes, outtakes, Prancing Pony ponderings, and you'll find our online storefront there where you can get PPP merch, including the amazing, breathtaking, always impressive artwork that Megan has done for the show over the last 2.5 seasons now.
You'll also want to visit our library page. The Prancing Pony podcast is, after all, a podcast about books. So if you're interested in the books that we have mentioned on the show, you can find a link for it in our library. We do get a small bit of compensation when you make that purchase. We do thank you for that. But I'm also, since this is my last episode, going to plug another book that might not be on that library page. Why We Love Middle-earth is an absolutely wonderful deep dive.
It has its own page on the website.
Well, I've just put my foot in my mouth.
No,
anyway,
thank you. I appreciate that, man. I mean, we enjoyed writing it so very much, and I'm glad that people are enjoying it. It was a lot of fun.
Also, they get a little bit more compensation, I think, from those sales. So,
we almost get a cup of coffee per book, almost.
Yeah. Oh, hey,
a cup of like Dunkin' Donuts coffee, not Starbucks coffee. which is better anyway, let's be honest, right?
If you're paying like $7 or $8 for coffee, is it truly coffee at that point, or is it just a flavored dessert with some coffee in it? That's all I'm asking. I don't actually drink coffee.
I know, actually, neither do I. I prefer my caffeine cold and bubbly.
I just prefer my medications. Adderall is a great replacement for that.
I love it. That's a fair point. Well, we also want to thank our patrons at the Círdan's contribution tier. I'm going to start with DeMay in Alaska, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Joseph in Michigan, Kathy from North Carolina, Carlos in California, Brian in the UK, Jerry from Washington, Joe in Washington, Erwin from the Netherlands, Ben in Minnesota, Anthony in Texas, Karen in the UK, June in Ireland, Zaksu in Illinois, Sarah in New Jersey, Joshua in Massachusetts, Lucy in Texas, and Keith in Alabama.
Before I get to my reading names, you can call me icing because I'm laying it on thick this time. I commented to Alan how many more people there were at this tier than the last time I was on here. And so hopefully if Alan wants to have me back, there's even more here. So I want to give a huge shout out to thank you to Erica in Texas, Carson in Oklahoma, Vivian in California, James in Massachusetts, Ann in Kentucky, Sean in New Jersey, Mason in California, Maureen from Massachusetts, Olivia in London, Robert in Arizona, Nick in Wisconsin, Lewis in South Carolina, Thomas in Germany, Craig in California, Bailey in Texas, Kevin in Massachusetts, Julie in Washington, Bruce in California, Nathan in Arizona, and Joe in Maryland. Thank you all very much for the support.
Indeed, thank you.
Make sure you don't miss any episodes of the Prancing Pony podcast. You can subscribe now through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your thoughts, comments, and most of all, your stories of brotherly love to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com.
And if you would like your voice literally heard as well, you can send us audio of your questions. Visit podinbox.com/prancingponypod and record your questions for us. Please be sure to still email the questions to Barliman.
That's right. Now, even though Barliman's been a lot more reliable in the last couple of years, there's still a lot of mail to sort through. We'll try to get to you just as soon as we're able. As always, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners and with such an excellent and admirable co-host. But until next time.
You honor me, my friend. Thank you. I have been Don Marshall, the obscure Lord of the Rings facts guy, and I have had the absolute pleasure of working through moving to a different state, surviving a hurricane, being out of town for 11 days straight, followed by another person being out of town for a few days straight, constant reschedules, and more text messages about rescheduling than I care to admit that would come from me. Alan, it has been an absolute pleasure being here yet again on the Prancing Pony podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.